John had mentioned, is in physics and engineering and math, and I've been doing that for too many years, 41. But my approach to this trip was affected by two things, two very powerful sentiments. First of all, as a believer and a person who's been studying the Bible for all his adult life, I always wanted to go and see the real places, and Professor Collins talked about the true data, is to see the actual evidence of what's there. And that, just to be in Israel, I kept thinking before the trip, just be there, just hanging out around Jerusalem or wherever to see those sites. And it was very exciting and it was gratifying. And the other was to see the actual data, to look at what is the evidence for this, that, or the other in terms of what was going on back in Old Testament days. So that's what affected my approach to the trip. What you have here is a picture of the site. I'll start using my pointer. And next slide, please. So this is, I don't know if it's the first principle, it's my first principle. And that stuff lasts forever. So, for example, these couple of pieces of roughly 3,500-year-old pottery, and this one I had showed it at the dig, and the archaeologist there said, well, it's secret. But then I talked to Professor Collins, he said, it's a secret pottery. At any rate, my wife looked at it and said, this is something that some Canaanite housewife used, say, 3,500 years ago. So that's what gives her a sense of its reality. At any rate, these two pieces, they're that old, and they just sit around, and after they've been finally broken to their last shard, then they don't change much. So that's what's really used so often in dating things in terms of pottery style and all that stuff. Next slide. So every project has to have every thing you're going to go and do, if it is very expensive, has to have a business case or a justification. And these are some of the reasons for this. The well, there we go. I don't know if you can even see that. That's interesting. It doesn't show it. Okay, I'll do without the point. So the well itself was within a fortified area, and Professor Collins mentioned about how the cities began to fortify, and Tel Gezer was one of those examples. The site was about 30 acres, and they had water sources outside the wall, but they needed one within. That's what this was. You'll see it. And there's some argument as to whether it was natural or was dug. I think it was a combination of the two, and we'll see that as we get into it. The last bullet, New Orleans Seminary, New Orleans Baptist Seminary, was the outfit that was running the dig, but they also had a tie-in with the Israeli, it's basically their National Parks Department and the Division of Archaeology. And on site was the director of that, Tzvi Katsuk, and he was native Israeli, and he's been doing archaeology for all his career. So that was it. It was the alliance between the two. And the permission, of course, was granted by the Israeli government through the National Parks Authority. Next slide. 3 words. I'm not a professor, but 3 very important words. Previous, please. Previous slide. Good. Okay. Yeah. Glacis, you'll see what that is. It's basically a part of your fortification ramp. Ashlar, it sounds kind of like a tree, but it's dressed as stone. So you have people in ancient days, they're going to build a wall and a fortification, and you can just take rough rock, but it makes it kind of hard to stack. So then they would cut off the sides. It would not be of a uniform size, but they would be uniformly cut off on the edges so that they could be stacked. And a casemate wall is another fortification concept. It's a double wall. You can fill in between the two, and you'll see some examples of that. Next slide. So the things I'll talk about the layout of the site, and then big details. I got movies, I've got stills. Then architectural features sounds kind of dry, but we'll get into that a bit. And Masada. Now it's not Tel Gezer, but we went to Masada, and it has a very fascinating means of supplying water. It's also an insight into the career of one of the most infamous kings in the Old and New Testament, although he died at the time of Christ. You've no doubt heard of Herod.
Yes.
Well, Herod was a dictator. He was kind of a combination of Napoleon, maybe a little Alexander the Great, a very astute politician, but also a terrible dictator. But what he did was build sites that would just blow you away, and Masada was one. Then Kirbit Kiafa, I'll leave that till we get to it, because to me it's an ultimate example of what one looks for in archaeological research. And finally, just a couple of short comments on what were the results. Did we fulfill our goals for the project, and what would we plan for next year? And then finally, just some personal memories. Next slide. Okay, next. So that doesn't come out too well, but anyway, so this is sunrise. Good place to start. No tridents intended, but you're looking obviously due east, and that little object down below is the generator. There's no power at the site, so every morning you start out with kick up the generator so you can light the lights inside the tunnel and not be in the dark. Okay, next. So this is a good layout of the site. You can see everything that's indicated there. Off in the distance, we're looking west, and that's Rehoboth and Tel Aviv. And just beyond that, the Mediterranean. And the standing stones, I'll show that close up at it's kind of, certainly not Stonehenge, but the same idea where you stick these stones in the ground. And they had, for the Canaanites, some religious, but also some calendric or calendar tracking significance. The water system tunnel is shown there. It's the big hole. And then Solomon's Gate complex, which has great significance at this site and other sites as well. Again, that being a tie-in with biblical history, that's now, it's really nice. You walk up to the stones and say, okay, the archaeologists have investigated, they have determined that yes, verily, this was built by Solomon during his reign. And we'll get into that next. So, yeah, can we turn off the lights at the front? Or is that possible? Just a little bit, I think. Yeah, that looks good. So, you see the white hard hat, and then the red winch there, and that was where I was. I was right underneath the winch, and I had this couple of buttons, and so I would push the button and keep the cable from getting snarled up. You'll see and hear that action a little bit. And that ramp there, you can see in the middle like a ladder. That's what the bags would slide up. So, it's an excavation. We're hauling literally overall tons of dirt out so that one can then begin to look at what was there when, and I'll mention the name McAllister. I'll get into that next. So this is another view, and there you can see the, on the right-hand side, the tunnel entrance. Like I say, it's kind of a hole. You go down, and then there's this kind of a cave/tunnel. There's, you can see the two casemate walls, the inner wall, outer wall, and then that big block. I'll say a bit more about that. Behind is a tower. And I have a clip of one of the archaeologists, Dan Warner, explaining what this fortification was like. And let me emphasize, this is the Canaanite build of the walls. It was circa, 1500 BC about. Solomon's, of course, came later, so that was a whole separate build. And you look at these sites, and Professor Collins can certainly speak to this far more than I, but you got all this buildup. You got to start here with when, as referenced, the city was fortified by the Canaanites originally, and then they lived there a while, and then they get destroyed, and then here comes another inhabitant, and then finally Solomon does his thing. So we'll get into all that. There's a whole lot of layers. Next. Okay, this is me in the tunnel. It's pretty kind of wet and dark, and average angle of around 33 34 degrees. So that's why we put the bags in, so we don't fall on our faces. And then all that safety rope's a good thing to have. And you would kind of want to wear a hard hat, because if you're not careful, you bang your head against the wall. So it's somewhat user unfriendly. Next slide. Okay, now this gives you the layout. It's kind of unusual because you've got this depth involved, and I've indicated the dimensions there, and then I've shown, and here I'll give a little bit of history, the big history. A fellow named McAllister came here in around, what was it, 1902 to 1909, somewhere in that range. And that was back when Israel was not Israel, it was Palestine. And it was not really Palestine, it was just a piece of Syria, which was under the Ottoman Empire. So a whole lot of changes have happened since then. Anyway, so McAllister came in, and he had 300 workers, and he just dug and cut. And you'll hear it mentioned later in a very unfavorable manner, because the guy didn't have current archaeological techniques of preserving stuff. He dug out his stuff and then kind of just threw the debris wherever and ruined it for later people. So one of the most significant things is what I've indicated there is McAllister's Causeway. What he did do that was a big help, he got down to the bottom where there was water, and then he laid out just some plates of chalk, or some big slabs of chalk, so that he could get past the water. In so doing, he sealed it. So then, when one got to the sealed chalk slabs, or the sealing chalk slabs, then one could then start to find useful archaeological evidence. So that was, the whole point was to get down to there, to dig below it, and then start pulling up artifacts of pottery, which is what we did. So I hope this is clear. And the other thing, at the end of McAllister's dig, they had a flash flood, and it filled a tunnel halfway up with debris. So he had this huge tunnel, 30 feet across or so, big, plugged with all this dirt. And next slide. So here's what the Orleans team had to do. I think they were primarily the sole diggers on this. They went in, and in 2 seasons, maybe a little bit of a third, well, 2 seasons, there you see it, 300 tons. So they pulled out 300 tons of dirt so they could get down to the good stuff. And so when we got there this year, then we started with that removed, and then we could go down, or they could go down, I was just running the winch, and then start finding usable pottery shard. So here, the excitement is to go to a spot that had been covered, and below the McAllister seal hadn't been touched for 3,000 years or so. So that was exciting. Also, since it's a water site, you would expect there to be a fair amount of traffic back and forth, people going in, pulling, with donkeys, whatever, getting water out. So then there would be stuff left, debris and trash. Next. So here we go. This is the potter. This is Amy. Now she was neat. She had just graduated from high school, and there was another high school kid, and they did very well as part of the team, hard-working kids. So that's what you do. You bring all this pottery up, bring up the bags of dirt, dump out the dirt, sort out the pottery, wash the pottery, and then you put it on the table and you sort out the pottery from the rocks. There was a lot of that, and that feeds into the final report on the trip. Next. Okay, now here's a video. Good. So here's the scan of the standing stones. Saw it the other day, but this is probably a little better picture of it. And it runs north-south, and it could have been used to determine seasons. They had to know seasons, and the famous Gezer calendar talks about which seasons to plant and water and so forth and so on. Anyway, so definitely there had to be a way to know what time of the year it was, what day of the year, or month of the year. That's what that's for. And then off in the distance is a flock of sheep. Now I've taken another shot of those closer up. Oh, and by the way, that's the sacrificial altar. That's why they know this would have been a high place, although apparently they didn't find any evidence of human or even animal sacrifice, but it looks pretty compelling evidence that would have been a high place. Here's another shot of the sheep herd. He comes up here, well, so far every day we've been here. And the grass looks pretty brown, but it's got food value. And those sheep eat it up. Okay. And next. Look back. Will work. Go. 140 feet from there down to the place where it flattens out where the water was. So here's a good view down into the cave. You can see down there towards the very bottom. The last bit would be where it gets flat, and you can see those sandbags and steps. Ozzy's ready, and we're ready to go. I hope you can all hear that well enough. At least the racket goes through. Okay, now this one, this is where they're down at the causeway and digging through that and getting down to the what would have been the final step. And the significance of the step is that would be the lowest level of the original cave. And once you get there and you get lower, you're hitting virgin territory, going back pre-McAllister. Next. So here's where the axis is right now. They're digging down to cut this trench until they hit the step. When they hit the step, then they can go forward, knowing that's where McAllister was, and anything below McAllister would be new stuff. So it's pretty well set up down here, and pretty soon you see those bags over there. That's what we'll be dragging up to haul out. Okay, next slide, but don't turn it on yet. Yeah, before I show this, this was a young man that was very unusual. I didn't know until about 10 days into the dig that he was legally blind. You wouldn't know it. He had sort of a look like he was trying to be cool, but he was actually, he could hardly see. But he was one of our most productive workers, very athletic type. And one interesting thing, you'll see him in the dig, and I don't think I tell you how he gets out, but I'll mention it after. Okay? Oh, by the way, this is down in the furthest extent, down in what was called the cave, and it's where we hope to find something. We didn't find anything here, but we found it later at that bottom step. Okay?
So this is Brooks in the hole. Oops, up there, back. 11 feet down, and over there, what comes up? A little black spot is for radiocarbon dating. So you think that's from a campfire or what?
She didn't really say what it was from. She's just going to try to see. Yeah. Boy, there's a bunch in that wall.
Yeah. Oh, it's up here. I think you just couldn't see this.
Yeah.
That's good. Any artifacts?
Okay, well, if you're doing a mountain climbing, you would know how he got out. It was a chimney. So he puts his back against one side, his feet on the other, and he walks up. So you can imagine what his shirt went like when he came out of the dig. Most of us got pretty dirty, and at the end of the day, I'll say more about that later. Okay, next. Okay, next. Long history, and again, you can sort of match it up with what Dr. Collins showed. So start out living in caves because they hadn't gotten around to digging anything. And then circa 2500, unfortified, 2000 to 1500, then they began to build the walls, and I'll have more on that in a little bit. And then I call it a colorful history or checkered history. 1468, they were conquered by Thutmose. You know, usually if you're going to get conquered by anybody, it'd be the Egyptians or the Syrians or the Babylonians. Tel Gezer or Gezer had their own share of being conquered. 14th century, then they had some notability. They showed up in letters to the kings of Gezer, swearing their allegiance to the pharaoh. And then mid-10th century, this is where it gets really interesting. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Gezer remained a Canaanite settlement until when Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. Then Pharaoh, as a wedding gift, as he said, then went up to the city, brought his army, took the city, killed all the people, burned it, and said, here's your wedding present. So it's kind of a mixed bag there, but what a father-in-law to have. And if you look at some of the maps of Israel, Jerusalem, certain time of Christ, there's a Pharaoh's daughter's grave. It was a big event for an Egyptian princess to marry a non-Egyptian. That was quite the thing. So what Solomon did, and Gezer has Hatzor and the ghetto, and then established his force. You can find that in the Bible. We went to all three. We were at Gezer, of course, and went to Hatzor and the ghetto as well. And you can see the fortifications there. Then 918, here they go again. You know, it's kind of like they settled for a while, and then here Shishak raised them and destroyed it again. And then the Israelites finally came back in and reestablished a settlement. And then Tiglath-Pileser of Syria conquered it in 734. And then it was part of Syria. And then after 600 BC, went back to Israel. Next slide. So this is what guys did in those days. You know, there was no restraint upon a ruler. So he goes in, and this is the cartoon that Tiglath-Pileser put in his, you might say, trophy room. So you can see here, they're up at the top, there's some hapless, at this date would have been Israelites, on the fortifications that you'll hear about in a minute. On the wall, you've got this machine, and it's a siege wall destroyer machine. So what it does, it sticks those probes there up between the rocks and starts working at them until finally, I mean, these things are not sealed, you just have rocks stacked up on one another. So you can take the wall down, start at the bottom, and keep working and working until you crowbar it out. That's what the machine's doing. And then you've got the Assyrians with their weaponry coming in to kill all the inhabitants. So that's how it was done in the day. it was kind of neat here. Well, neat in a sense. It wasn't neat for them, but here you've got the Tel Gezer, or the Gezer fortifications on the wall and the palace at Nineveh. So that was a neat time. Next. So the biblical history is quite interesting. Starts out, here comes Joshua, and so you've got Lachish, which is another part of the site, and Horam of Gezer got together, and Joshua beat them both. But the city remained under Canaanite occupation. They did not take the city. And what's the reason? Well, they had this big wall, and even though they were surrounded by Israelites, the Israelites couldn't take the city, which is too well fortified. And in Joshua, it's mentioned that it's one of the cities for the Levites. The Levites had special provisions. And it didn't say they got the city, it said they got the pasture lands. If you look around the Tel today, it's quite fertile. It's probably true back then. And they did say in the Old Testament text in Judges, in Joshua again, said they were taken as forced labor. So you can imagine here you've got the city, you've got the wall, you're safe, but you go outside the wall, then you might get snagged by Israelite who would say, okay, I want you to work for me, because then you no longer have your protection. And then finally, what you've already heard about in the destruction by Pharaoh, provide the wedding gift. Next slide. So this is where it gets kind of interesting, and here I'm obviously relying on documentation that one finds on the web. What is the proof, or I should say the evidence, for the establishment of Solomon's forts at the three places? Well, it's in the nature of the gate. It's called the Solomonic Gate. And there are other chambered gates, but the fact that the three sites are mentioned as forts built by Solomon, and if you go to the sites today, you find the same. It's really a six-chambered gate in each. So that is very compelling evidence that, yeah, the biblical account here is correct. This is what actually happened in history, and that, to me, is pretty exciting. And you notice the ashlar there, so you can use your vocabulary. So these are well-dressed stones, and establishing a wall that would be fairly sound. So that was that. Next. Now, I'll talk about the architectural. Now, this is a talk by Dan Warner, and he's describing how things were set up in those days. And just to give a caveat, I was just learning to use the camera, so my camera shots are not the best. And also, I didn't want to, like that in the guy's face, so I tried to keep the camera sort of low-key and out of sight. But he has some very interesting things to say about the nature of the fortifications.
About 27 acres, something like that. It's nice. It's a very large site. The actual one, the second largest, is 150 acres. Hot sword, which you'll see, is 200 acres. Largest site. But anyway, so the Canaanites, they came with an ingenious method of developing these huge earthen ramparts, which they would plaster the outside, sloping plaster, all right? Sloping plaster. And then they built fortifications. They built an outer wall and an inner wall. I'm going to show you both of those in a moment. That's what we go around. An outer wall and an inner wall. The outer wall sits, parts of it sitting right about a little bit, it's above us, above the outer wall. And then the inner wall is a little further in. This site has over 64 different towers. McAllister counted when he excavated the site. 64 different towers. An outer and inner wall. The outer wall is about 20 feet thick. The inner wall is about 15 feet thick. And then they built this sloping plus. Huge earth ramparts. This one is about 75 feet high. Then they had the outer wall, and then the inner wall. The wall foundation probably about 10 feet high. And then you had mud brick structure on top of that, probably another 10, 15 feet high. And then you had towers on top of that. You're down there. And they're saying, right down there. So Joshua says in the biblical text, the spy said, listen, we can't take these cities. There's giants in the land. And the next phrase he says, and they're too fortified. Well, build these earthen ramparts around the city like you're going to take it anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Right? We bring in loads of dirt, impact it. We dug it over here at Fortification. I'll show you some of it. Impact with huge boulders, then retaining walls to make sure none of them slip. Then you plaster it. Whoa, quite impressive. So you're looking at 100, 250 walls with the glossy. That was just the first wall. And then you got to get through it in the second. Every city had a double wall. Jerusalem, I don't know if you get a chance to see it, but it's a massive wall at Jerusalem. Jericho, all of that double. Inner and outer walls, just like cannons.
Rampart is this slope.
Rampart, it's called glacis, G-L-A-C-S-I-S, glacis. Ramparts, from the, during the medieval periods, they had ramparts and moats. This actually had a moat as well. I don't know if there's crocodiles in it. There are crocodiles in Israel because there's a river up here just north of us that separates this region. It's called Tananim. Tananim is the Hebrew word for crocodile.
When you talk about that, see, I'm
Yeah. So Gezer is a very significant site. It's been heavily excavated. There's been 4 major campaigns at the site. The first campaign was a guy by the name of McAllister. McAllister was, he came and he just trenched everything. He just cut big trenches right across the top. Did 31 of them. And he just dug down as far as he could go. Right? Once he dug one trench, he would backfill it with the next trench. And he moved away across the tail. So he had about 300 workers, and the way he found things was we rewarded them. I'll pay you so much money for everything you find. Find this, get this. So it's just a big treasure. He never located exactly where things were found, no stratigraphic relationship with the objects, because we date everything through pottery, right? Pottery's been studied for the past 150 years. We can find with the rims of pottery called diagnostic shards, we can date something within 75 years, 50 to 75 years, and get that precise. If we get an inscription, we can date within 25 to 35 years. They know the characters by heart, how they look, how the shapes change and turn. Stratigraphic sequence. We're not doing much stratigraphic sequence in digging the well. It's totally not a true it's an archaeology project, but it's maybe shredded. We hope to date the system. So the Canaanites are powerful engineers, great artisans, great engineers, because they dug the water system we're going to look at all by hand. No dynamite, flint tools, bronze tools, chink, 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 and then they did all that stuff out. So McAllister trenched across the whole area. Not very good stratigraphic control. You can get his volumes. It's free online. It comes in a JPEG. It comes in a PDF. Just type in McAllister volume 1, 2, 3. You can find it. Download the PDFs. On your computer. All of McAllister's plans. So we're going to see what he did. And it talks about you can read about what he dug in the water system. McAllister dug it back in.
Yeah. So just as you can see, McAllister's not held in very high regard, and he did do very, you might say, slipshod archaeology in terms of what left for the people to come next. Here's a good picture of the seat. You see as he said, they would fill in with dirt, they would make it as steep as they could, and then they would plaster so it was slippery. So as you can imagine, here comes your army, and you've got this slippery slope, and above that you got the wall and the towers. And as you said, there were 64 towers, and so a tower is a much higher spot. So that gives you a very good field of view to rain down arrows and destruction from the attempting attackers. Next slide. So now, we did talk some about, we found out some interesting thing about how people lived in those days. Now this is circa probably 1400, 1300 BC. This is still the Canaanite established part. So the archaeologists explained, this is a different site, is that, well, they didn't live in a house like we do. They would have a room, and they would use it for sleeping and cooking, and maybe shelter. Other than that, they were outside all the time. Considering the society of the day, they were either working with, like a slave, or they were the guy who was running the slave group. So, and you look at the thickness of the wall, it's very, and that could have been just a matter of what was convenient to be able to provide a wall. But there you have it. So rather than living room, dining room, den, all that, one room, and you cook or you sleep, and that's it. Next slide. And this, here you can see in the background, there's the wall. So this was actually located on the inner wall. And it could have been for ready access to the gate, not clear, but obviously you had other rooms apart from the wall. And then behind the wall, you can see there's kind of a gap, and you'll see the casemate in a minute. Next. So this is a good layout, a good depiction of the Solomonic gate. You've got 6 chambers. They're about, what, 4 to 5 meters deep. And if you look in the book of Ruth, it talks about Boaz coming down to the gate and carrying on his business transaction regarding Ruth and her property and her marriage. So that was one thing the gate was used for. It was to carry out your business. So the chambers would give you some privacy to carry the business out. And the other thing, you know, the gate is the weakest point of defense on the entire wall. So then you put, you know, big guys with sharp spears in there, and as the attacker came through, then he gets poked at and taken out by those guys. So there were a couple of reasons for having that multi-chambered gate, and it was evidently a common feature. Next. Now, this is totally backward. Yeah, this is totally different. And we did take a trip to Masada, but here the water system is of a wholly different character and somewhat amazing. And you know, I had mentioned Herod was a terrible despot, but he also had marvelous engineering and public works projects. He would say, okay, I want to build a castle or a palace right here on this hill. This is a place called Woodinville. He said, I want it to be higher than the highest hill in Jerusalem. So these guys, you know, this architect and whatever, he said, well, unfortunately, that hill is not higher than all of Jerusalem. He said, okay, we'll make it. So then they carried in dirt and raised the height of Woodinville, so then it was indeed higher than Jerusalem. So that's how the guy thought. So now he says, I'm going to make myself I guess you'd say a winter palace, because it is out in the desert where it's a whole lot hotter. And we make it really nice. But if you have a palace, you've got all your servants, slaves, what have you, you got to have water. And the next one. So here's the problem. You can see this is just a sun-baked plateau in the middle of a totally treeless, barren desert just above the Dead Sea. And oh, by the way, on the right-hand side there, I've called out the ramp that the Romans built. So that is indeed how the Roman army came in and took Masada. But I had thought of Masada as kind of a last stand, and it was. But there's far more to it than that. It was an enormous building project of bringing luxury, state-of-the-art luxury, to a desert plateau. So the question is, well, how did they get the water? Next slide. Now this is an artist, obviously, artist's depiction of what it would have looked like back in the day. So here it came in and sort of built into the rock and upon the rock these palaces. And from the ruins they can infer that, yeah, this is probably what it looked like. So it was quite a palatial site. Next. Now this is a model that shows you how they got the water. And you can see someone pouring water, so you can see those channels that the water is running down. And what they would do is they had a dam up in the highlands where they would collect the water, and then the water would flow through all these channels into, next slide, these, that shows up, it's a little hard to see, but you can see the circled holes. Those are where the various cisterns are located. So the water would flow down through you could call them irrigation canals, whatever, and then be collected. And then the total capacity of all the cisterns of the site was 10 million gallons. You know, and as one article said, well, it wasn't so much how did he do it, we know that, but why did he think he needed so much water? And probably, you know, being the despot he was, say, well, I want to be sure I have plenty. So he did. Next. So this is a demonstration, and it is using the model, and Dennis adds, let's see, yeah, Dennis Cole is adding some information to how the water is collected. Okay, go back. That's the one. Oh, here we go.
Various levels, you can see a couple of entrances, you see the little holes on the side, but again, water to feed into these cisterns. So the channeling of this huge drainage basin, you would call it, all the way up, especially into the body, channeling the waters in, and how they develop the water systems. So when it flows through the hill country, notice how the water is going all into those areas. Likewise, again, they don't have to go to the top. All the water that fell on top would go into some of the cisterns we saw. The one we went into was largely a top-fed cistern. But others, like this one, were actually the water fell in with just a small opening, channeling stuff from this area into that cistern and other parts of the water. But the ritual bath. So again, those like a little water line here, just watch the water channel into the cistern areas.
Okay, next slide.
Waters.
But don't play yet. So one of the things they had on this, and you saw the actual air photo of the place, it's pretty big. I don't know how many acres, but fair size. One of the things they had up there, I'm talking about Herod's day, and at the time of the Masada, well, at the time of the siege, they had a big swimming pool. So you think, here's how they got it on. I'm going to be in the middle of the desert, and it's going to get hot. Got to have my Olympic swimming pool. I mean, it was a big swimming pool. You can go to the website and get some idea of the size of it. So now, Dennis is describing the probable activities of the Jews. They were under siege, but this is a fun story. Okay?
There's a valley over there that separates this hill from the hill to the south. You see the outer, you see the little piles of rock on the horizon of that rock over there? That's a Roman camp. The Romans literally, they surrounded the whole area, the biggest camp went down by the ramp, the main camp where, all the generals down on that side of the ramp. But they had soldiers even over there, again, monitoring. We saw the siege wall around the perimeter of this. Comes up to that hill, and then, of course, 42 is about the cliffside. But the Roman camp existed over there. Water supply. Whoa. They're over there, as we say, dying of thirst. Here is one of the largest cisterns we're going to go down into in just a second. Over here is the great bathing pool. So it's like, this is the Olympic pool. Okay. And so you can imagine the Jews over here playing with the water, splashing around, while the Roman soldiers are over there. Taunting the Roman forces. Didn't work out too well. So, in the end,
So this is the big
Okay, pause for a minute. Yeah, so now we're actually down in the cistern, and I've got a little bit more on that, but I estimated that the volume was probably, well over 500,000 gallons of this particular system that you go down and walk around. Okay?
solid. See how huge it is. Very deep. Very wide. Very long. How many gallons? Hey, man. There's the way out of the system. All the way back to the top.
So that one would have been from the collection of water that fell on the actual site. So in addition to all the drainage from up in the highlands and collecting, then they had this site where you just collect whatever flows off your area. Okay, this is just another shot of the system. Okay, now this one, totally different. It's nothing to do with water. But to me, it's one of the more exciting ones because this, to me, is the ultimate in the satisfaction of archaeology for a novice like myself. And, you know, Dan Warner, that gave the talk about Gezer, made the point, and I think it's a good one. He said I'm a biblical archaeologist. He said, what is biblical archaeology? He said, we're not trying to prove the Bible. He said, the Bible is self-authenticating. I like that term. He said, what we're doing, he said, I don't entirely agree, but he had a good comment. He said, there's one area where we find out more about the Old Testament. He said, you know, you take some theological concepts like free will or things like that, and say, how long have people been debating that? 200 years. You know, all this has been written. But he said, with archaeology, we get the hard evidence, and then we can move on. And that's how I like to look at it. We had an occasion to be at Timna, and I don't have any photos, but here we're standing at this site. It's only an acre or so. And you got all these remnants of the original walls. And so here, Dennis Cole was explaining, he said, this is where Samson got his first wife. You know, you stand there and think, man, so what was it, 300 years ago, whatever, a long time. But the actual Bible story, and he said, so he would have come from his home, I can't think of the name right now, but up 10 miles that way, and would come down here. So you're standing there thinking, oh yeah, this is where these things really took place. It gave it a tangible reality that I really appreciated. And that's what this next slide is about. Okay. So in the Old Testament, there's a reference to Sha'arayim. We went to this site, and Dennis Cole explained that most cities would have either one gate if it's small, fortified city, or would have many. You know, I stop at two. Two is unique. And in the reference to Sha'arayim, which means in Hebrew 2 gates, this site was found in, wasn't even discovered in 2007. And it gives you a sense of how much there is yet to be found. We went to Gath, and of course that's the last hometown. And the archaeologist there, a very interesting guy. His father was a Babylonian, a Babylonian Jew. He said, well, what was it? I guess it's Saddam Hussein chased him out, but you know, he could presumably trace his ancestry back to the Jews who were left in Babylon and never came home. Anyway, so this Babylonian Jew, Iraqi, was explaining, said here at Gath, we've got many acres. We've only uncovered 2% of what's here. There's so much more to do. So, and this is an example. This was an unknown fortified ruins discovered only in 2007. So here's, you can see the chambered gate again. This happens to be the south gate. And you think of it, I would think of it more as a fort rather than just a city. And the Hebrew, the Israeli archaeologists and others have examined the site and the radiocarbon, the pottery, the whole bit. And they peg it at 1000 BC plus or minus 50 years. And you know, when it comes to that, I have to say, okay, I'll take their word for what they found. Well, you know where that lands it. And what I think of, and we'll say a bit more, it would have been the outpost for Saul. Here Saul's fighting the Philistines. Excellent. And oh, by the way, here's the casement wall, just an example. You know, you're looking up Elah Valley, and you know, remember David Goliath has a certain resonance to it. Yes. So there's a casement wall and surrounding this, and I would call it a fort. Next. So here's, and I'll just kind of run through this. So here, the Philistines are gathered in Soko and camped between Soko and Azekah. You'll see those in a minute on the map. And they were, said the Philistines were on one mountain on one side, and the Israelites were on the other. And then the next thing after the battle and death of Goliath and David, and they slain Philistines lay on the way to Sha'arayim, even to Gath and Ekron. So that's the 2 gates, and that is the correlation between that Hebrew word. In fact, you think, okay, so when this occurred, when it was written, circa 1000 BC, and then the site got covered, and then finally in 2007, then it's discovered, and then people start making connections. And in examining the site and dating, they also observed that there were no idols or no human or animal figurines, which may have occurred in Israeli sites, but if you don't see them, that says it's definitely not Canaanite. And the bones, the animal bones from the Niles contain no pigs. So again, that's a pretty good indicator. So pull all that together. Next slide. So this is the aerial view, and here you can see Azeka. When I say Azeka, they have dug the site, have made a correspondence between it and the Old Testament Azeka. You see Soko over on the right, and then in between is Sha'arayim, and then between the two you have the Love Valley and the Dry Creek bed, which David got the stones from the creek, so it all fits in. Next slide. So then back here, we see, in this particular perspective, the far side, that's where Soko is, and that would be the mountains on one side, and for us they're all hills, but still they're qualified as mountains in Israeli scale. And on this side would have been the fort where Saul would have had his command post, no doubt, and this is where the Israelites stood. Next slide. And this is simply another view of it. Again, you can see Soko on the right and Kirbet Kiafa on the left. Okay, then the final slide. So, and we're standing there, and as the dentist was explaining, he said, so then you have had over there, where the Philistines, over here, the Israelites. David's dad said, okay, take your brothers some meals and some gifts for their commanders. And we'd been in Bethlehem a few days before, so 14 miles that way is Bethlehem. So you can imagine David hiking along, and as he approaches the site, then he would see the Philistines encamped on the hills and would avoid them and come over to the Israeli side. But what was neat, saying, yeah, he would come from there, up there is Bethlehem, and through here, and that would have been it. And then the rest is biblical history. So that was that. I was very satisfied with that particular vignette because it pulled so many things together. And I think one of the most interesting things, they didn't even find it until 2007. Once again, a whole lot more than we found. Next. So did we make our goal? Yeah, they did the probes. They found out that the floor cave was probably not a good source. The probes they did didn't turn up stuff. They were able to establish from the pottery they found at the base of the step. In fact, I made sure to check with Dennis Cole about this. I said, well, we got radiocarbon dating. He said, well, they took that to the lab, and they said the evaluation of the pottery was clean. In other words, the pottery was sufficiently compelling that they would date that at late bronze. And said, yeah, we could do radiocarbon. We would have more confidence in the pottery dating anyhow. Well, there you have it. And that would say everything they find below that level then are pre-late bronze, pre-1200 BC. So that's what we do next year. Then is go back, look for more pottery. And, we didn't do the entire area, so there are other areas to look at. We did find some very interesting pieces of pictures and things like that. And the other thing is whether there's a back door to the tunnel. It would have been nice because you have to go down so far. If there had been a way in the back way where in peacetime you could just go out and come in from behind and get the water that way. So they're going to look for that. And they want to clarify the dating, really nail it down to the in connection with the ancient city of Gezer. And then finally, just some, I really enjoyed it. I'd get up at 5 o'clock. Well, after you've got a, 9-hour time shift anyway, 5 o'clock doesn't mean anything more than 6 o'clock. So you roll out at 5. And there was 3 of us in the room. We all got along well. And, being in Seattle, the first thing was get that cup of coffee going, and I'd go sit on the patio and had my nook. I could go through Psalms or whatever scriptures and have my breakfast and go and work all day. And I found out that if you're busy, you really enjoy it. If you didn't, if you're just kind of drifting around with nothing to do, I mean, if you ever do this, be sure you get an assignment that keeps you moving along and involved in something that's making headway. And I found real quickly that I'm no good at restoration, taking little rocks and putting them back in the wall, but I can do it always. So I found my slot. So you want to find your slot. And like I say, at the end of the day, dusty, dirty, really hot, and then that dive into the pool was so refreshing. It made it worthwhile. And the other thing, of course, seeing the sites and that the memory of here's where Samson did this, here's where David did that. And then when you see, like Lachish, I haven't said anything about that, but there was, when Lachish was under siege, again, I think it was Nebuchadnezzar, but a cartoon was made of what he had done to those poor Israelites at Lachish. So things like that really nailed down, yeah, this, what the Bible says here really happened. So that's my presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and if I can't answer them, I'll turn it back. Cool. I'm sorry. Repeat the question. Okay.
Simple question. Where in Masada or these other water places did they actually get enough water? I know there was some in the hills, but 10 million gallons. How long did it take to get that much? Was it climate?
Yeah, they were collecting from a whole lot of area.
By hand?
Oh no, I showed you had channels
There was enough
that would flow into the cistern. And so then the cistern would collect water. That was automatic. All they had to do was keep the channel free of debris. And when it would rain and collect.
Oh, rain, okay.
Yeah, it's not totally without water. So you might have 5-10 inches a year, but if you take 100 acres, you got 5 inches, you can over time get a lot of water. Yeah.
Did the Romans try to cut off those channels?
I don't think so. I mean, they'd already stored up, and the Romans' real goal was to march up and kill everybody. Yeah. Go ahead.
The Romans built the siege, the ramp without being shot at.
Oh, they were probably shooting back, and they probably had a guy with a shield to protect them. They were old hands at this sort of thing. And you had
I heard when I was at Masada, so whether it's true or not, I don't know, but the Romans made slaves of Jews, and the Jewish people would not generally fight against their own brethren when they built the ramp.
Oh, that could be it. Yeah, in fact, you think about it, okay, who's going to do the hard work? Not the soldier.
Right.
That's it. No doubt. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, Gezer had the distinction of one of the oldest Semitic writings up till they found something at Kibbutz Kiafra. So my understanding is that the Gezer calendar was one of the oldest existing examples of Semitic writing. The other thing was they found the boundary stones around Gezer that said this area belongs to Gezer. So that was a very obvious designation of that as the biblical Gezer, plus the location. Oh, and I didn't say the location is, what is it? Well, you've seen that in the handout, so you're going to do that. Yeah.
So what kind of alphabet was the writer for Gezer? Or
Semitic?
But when you say Semitic, what was the alphabet?
Oh, the alphabet's from Semitic? It's Proto-Hebrew, right? There you go, Proto-Hebrew. Yeah, that evolved into what we have today, I suppose. But it's not like, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is it's not like the Jews were always people that spoke Hebrew. They were in a culture where that was a dominant language, and that happened to be in the language that which the Bible was written. But there were many Semitic speakers, weren't there?
So were they able to talk to one another in the same language?
You mean,
The Canaanites and the Hebrews?
oh, that? Well, I don't know. The Canaanites, and again, I'm in over my depth, but I would imagine they had a separate language. I don't know. You might find it on the web.
Were you given a population estimate for Gezer?
I didn't get that. I didn't.
How many acres?
27. So you take 27 acres and
150
Few hundred.
per acre,
150?
per acre average.
There you go. Work that out, so 4,500. Small city,
4,500.
roughly a little less. But, and, you know, it was really interesting being there because you see, oh, this is obviously a lot of effort to build these walls and these towers and the whole bit. Well, there's a good reason for it. They'd be confident otherwise. Yeah.
In the book, the source Michener describes one of these water systems being built. You know where that was?
Which one now?
Michener's book.
Oh, which one? I don't know. I've never. I was, yeah.
Michener's book is based on a fictitious depiction of Megiddo.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a reliable source text for archaeology. I've heard it recommended highly, but that was some stranger airport.